So now maybe in French, Jean-Marc, no? In English? Okay, so we will have now the pleasure to listen to Professor Jean-Marc Thouvenin from Nanterre University, Secretary General of the Hague Academy, who I'm just going to read the title because I think it's quite provocative title, but you can come on the presentation. In the case, States versus the Earth, what to expect or not from international judges. Jean-Marc, c'est à toi. Merci.
Good morning. I'm indeed representing the Hague Academy of International. I'm very proud of the Hague Academy of International, I must say. I think that most of you know this marvelous institution, but perhaps not all of you know that the institution began its journey 100 years ago, in 1923. So it's the centenary we celebrate this year. And I was wondering, listening to all that, whether in 100 years from now, the Hague Academy will still exist, or will everybody and everything be burned? So if I ask that question to a politician, he will say, don't worry, we will deal with it. And the Academy will survive 100 years more. In France, one politician said once that promises are only binding on those who believe them. That sort of posture is amazing. Sometimes politicians stick to their promises, but in general, it's promises that no one asks them to put forward. I have examples, but I won't be rude with France. Now, the real issue when it comes to the necessary measures to be taken to fight against the global warming by reducing the emission of greenhouse gases is that governments are not consistent. They promise a lot, but they do not enough. I say so not in the air, but under the authority of the French Conseil d'État. And this is just an example. There are many other examples, so I'm not focusing on France, but I can bring to you this example. I refer here to a case brought before the Conseil d'État by a French municipality living from tourism. And this municipality claimed that the French government was not taking appropriate measures to curb the greenhouse gas emission produced in France, and therefore did not comply with France's commitments, undertakings with respect to climate action. The Conseil d'État, in a judgment of July 2021, agreed with the applicants that France was simply not acting credibly in order to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases by 40% at the horizon of 2030, as it had committed to. In judging the French inaction as unlawful, the French Conseil d'État specifically referred to the UNFCCC and to the Paris Agreement, as well as to the European Union law, which is trying to implement these international commitments. The applicant then cites the European Court of Human Rights against France for failure to take sufficient climate action, claiming that this inaction is in breach with Article 2 and 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And Article 2 is about right to life, and Article 8 is about right to respect for private and family life. And we can understand why family life is at stake, because when you have children, in general, it's your family and you think of their future, and you think that perhaps this future is not very much taken into account when it comes to climate action. So that's interesting. I think it's interesting, don't you think so? Well, in fact, there are now 6 climate applications before the European Court of Human Rights, 6. And they're pending, waiting for treatment after the Grand Chamber, because it considers it's important. The Grand Chamber will have made its position in currently 3 emblematic climate requests. So what's the purpose of all this? What for? The challenge for applicants is to convince the judges that non-respect of the commitments agreed under the Paris Agreement is a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights. In other words, the challenge is to try to, if I may say so, set up human rights teeth for biting those who do not hold on their climate promises. A lot of expectations. The same kind of expectation is now before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and I think you referred to that yesterday in your opening lecture. I don't know if everybody knows about that, but there is an amazing request for advisory opinion before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is sort of the same as the one which are before the European Court of Human Rights. Well, it could have been better done, to be honest, because if you read the application, the request, there are many questions, but not a clue on how the judges could deal with it. I suppose that parties to the Inter-American Convention will provide some advices. I would be very happy to help if necessary. The same expectation, sort of the same expectation, is now before the ITLOS. We discussed that a little bit. An international organization, the COSIS, indeed was courageous enough to put to the ITLOS a challenging question, which is whether Part 12 of the UNCLOS has something to say about global warming, and more precisely about the causes of global warming, which is the emission of greenhouse gases, and it has been touched upon already. And the funny thing is that it will go very fast before the ITLOS. I think that the pleadings, the hearings, will be organized somewhere next autumn, so it will be a very quick movement. And of course, we are also expecting some news from Vanuatu and the General Assembly soon. Well, the question is really challenging, I would say, but that's interesting and it will need a lot of thinking. So what can we expect from judges? And that was my question. Of course, I don't have the answer. What I can say is that what can be expected from them is wisdom. And to help them, what can be expected from the international community is that it participates, in French we would say en masse, to all these proceedings, as much as possible, to show to the judges how crucial is what they will say. It can be a game changer, or it can be nothing. And my expectation from perhaps the Society for International is to engage in these discussions and to say what they would like the judges to say. Wouldn't it be interesting to think about that, of what could be the role of a Society for International in such a moment where the earth is burning and where judges are requested to say that? Perhaps it would be interesting to think of providing them some food for thought, as we said yesterday, useful food for thought. I'm sure it would be the case, and I put that on the table for further discussion. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Marc, and I think really what you said about expectations is really important because we are at a unique moment where we have this number of requests from ITLOS. We will have the one ICJ. The resolution will be adopted next week on the 29th, and the one before the Inter-American. And what could be the role of civil society also in participation on those proceedings, though not formally, but in making submissions through states or directly if there's room for that. So the call for the societies for international law to think about how to also feed on that process is a very interesting one and might be discussed maybe in the closing session. So